Okay, friends, Greg Koukl here, and I'm starting out a little disappointed because I expected to spend this hour with a friend and colleague and wonderful writer and apologist, Stephen C. Meyer, and he's not with us today. He had a family emergency, so he wasn't able to make it. You know, I'm not chuckling at his family emergency. I'm chuckling at, my my loss, our loss. However, he is going to. This is just a mere postponement, and he'll be back. He will be with us in the future, hopefully the near future. His new book is called Return of the God Hypothesis, 3 scientific discoveries that reveal the mind behind the universe. There is no better person to talk to about this stuff than Stephen C. Meyer. He's fabulous. And so I am, you're going to have to listen to me now as I launch out here in the beginning of our show. And of course, we got callers on board. We'll get to those shortly, and glad to do so. But I often wonder. Oh, before I get into I often wonder, let me write that down. Wonder. Okay. Just a quick update on our reality coming up in a little more than 2 weeks. 2 weeks and a few days. In Minneapolis, we have 2,240 people signed up as of today, latest figures. I think when we opened, we had the largest opening we ever had 2 years ago before COVID, 2,400 roughly. And I expect we'll be way past that, obviously, 2.5 weeks to go. And we got 160 to cover there. I think we're going to go past the most we've ever had, which is 2,700. And we'll be at Grace Church, Eden Prairie on the 12th and 13th of November. I know there's been a fairly long Indian summer in northern Wisconsin and apparently also in Minnesota. It hasn't gotten that cold yet, but in a couple of weeks it might be pretty chilly. So, but we're looking forward to going anyway. In fact, I also have another event. I'll be in Edna, Minnesota, November 12th. I'll be talking about science and faith. Are they compatible? That will be at an event sponsored by Search Ministries. It's a breakfast. That means it's early. I've done this 2 times before. This is my 3rd round with this wonderful group, and I'm looking forward to it. If you go to str.org/events, you'll find a link so you can get the tickets. It's one of those kinds of things. This is when, a lot of folk bring their friends who don't know the Lord to hear a speaker to talk in a way that makes sense to them and allows them opportunity to think about considering the Christian worldview and at the heart of it, Jesus himself. And Search is really good at that. Always glad to be able to have these opportunities. And so anyway, that's coming up on let's see, where's the November 12th. That's early. That's the morning of November 12th. So that would be Friday morning of the evening event starting on the 12th at 6 o'clock, I believe, and then all day Saturday at Grace Church, Eden Prairie. Tim Barnett, he's finally broken out of Canada. He did for us just the last couple of weekends that we've had, Southern California and Seattle. He'll be in Amelia, Ohio for their Equip weekend. It's Bridgeway Church there, Saturday, November 6th, Sunday, November 7th. Tim's a lot of fun. He is a fabulous communicator. If you're within striking distance of Amelia, Ohio, and I honestly don't know where that is. It sounds small, okay, but it's probably close to a larger area, whatever. Those of you who live there know. So if you're within striking distance, I suggest that you go and check out Tim. He's going to be talking about tactics and faith deconstruction, false ideas about God, the problem of evil. The URL is Bridgeway Amelia, Amelia, bridgewayamelia.church. Is that right? Is that a URL? .church? Bridgeway Church in Amelia, Ohio. Okay, check it out. And I think you'll really enjoy them if you get a chance to go. Also, tomorrow, Wednesday, which would be today if you're listening to the podcast when it comes out on the first day. That would be October 27th, 6 p.m. LA time. John Noyes will be live on Facebook, on Twitter, and on YouTube. He'll be discussing intelligent design, and his podcast is called To the Point. So To the Point with John Noyes, and you can bring your questions if you want for John to answer. That's tomorrow at 6 p.m. LA time, or today now, I guess, as you're looking at it. Wednesday, October 27th. Okay, now, sometimes I wonder, I wonder how much is caught from the things that I say over time about issues, and not just about issues, but about how to think about issues, how to work through issues, how to assess challenges. And I there's a lot that I've written in the tactics book and a lot of other places as well where my goal, and this is broad-based for us, it's not just me, it's our other communicators as well, my young guns, I call them. Our goal is not to just teach you what to think. Here's what to think about that. Here is the right way of thinking about that. Of course, we're going to tell you what we think is right, but we're also going to be communicating why we think it's right. And hopefully in a way that helps you to learn not just what to think, but how to think. Not just what to think, but how to think. And sometimes the how part, even though we can articulate it in different ways, and we try to do that, a whole part of that is not so much taught as it is caught. I'm thinking just of my own capabilities as a thoughtful Christian and going through all those years, 13 actually, working to earn my master's degree in philosophy at Talbot. You're not supposed to take 13 years for that, like 2 or 3. And then they start getting nervous. You're hanging around here too long. But they gave me a lot of grace. I guess part because we had an influence in bringing a lot of folks to their graduate programs. Anyway, they didn't fuss with me, and I worked on it. And but all of those years of rubbing shoulders with all of those smart people, not just on the faculty, but the smart students, a lot of that rubbed off. That's the way it works. And I just picked up certain habits of how to think about things and how to assess things because I saw these habits modeled by the smart people that I was exposed to in that program. And my fantasy is that the time that we spend together, you and I, in these sessions are occasions for smart things to rub off on you. And so that you learn not just what to think as I argue for a particular point and make my case regarding truth, especially biblical truth, but how I happen to get there. I hope that rubs off too, helping you to recognize foolishness and linguistic nonsense and manipulation and propaganda and the like, so that you can get past the nonsense, the linguistic manipulations, the propaganda, and see what's at stake, what the issues are, what the facts are, what the reasons are, and make good judgments about important things. All right, having said that, I wonder. I like to think that this makes a difference in your life, not just in the first sense, what to think, but in the second, how to think. People have reported that to me, so I'm gratified for that. But when I'm looking at a piece right now from the Toronto Star, all right, came in a couple of months ago, actually, in June, in the summer, regarding the Pride, the gay Pride parades that were happening during that month. And the question that's posed by a pastor, Michael Koren, look, he's a contributing columnist there to the Toronto Star. I'm looking at what his bona fides are here. Toronto-based writer, contributing columnist to the Star's opinion section. But he's Reverend Michael Koren. It's interesting. He's got this characterization at the front of his name, Reverend, like he's a man of the cloth, but it doesn't say anything more about that. So whatever, okay, fine. But Reverend Michael Koren writes this piece that that is given the parade WWJD. What would Jesus do? And he reflects on his own life that he used to be kind of narrow-minded and judgmental and hateful, and now he's not. He used to be opposed to what he calls equal marriage, which this is a euphemism, right? Nobody believes in equal marriage, which means same-sex marriage, believes in equal marriage. All you have to do is ask them, do you think kids should get married? They're going to say no. Well, then you don't believe in equal marriage. You believe in marriage for a certain segment of the population. That's the same thing I believe in, marriage for a certain segment of the population. We just identify different segments of the population as appropriate segments for marriage. All right? So there's something you see. It jumped right out at me when I read the piece. Equal marriage. Oh, that's a nice way. That is a nice way to compliment yourself about your own view. But it isn't an even-handed way of characterizing the view. Even-handedly would be to say same-sex marriage, not even gay marriage. Because frankly, what your sexual preferences are is not on the form, right? What's on the form is your gender, which is ironic now when I think about it, because this is up in the air too. You can't have same-sex marriage unless you have same sex. But same-sex means that you're both male or you're both female. But if male or female aren't anything in particular, then how can you have same-sex marriage? I guess you could have self-identity. So my wife and I could be involved in a same-sex marriage if I just decided to identify myself as a female or she a male. Then we're in a same-sex marriage, even though we're heterosexuals. By the way, that's the point I'm making. Doesn't matter what your sexual preference is. Same-sex marriage is the same sexes. But I'm also identifying that this is kind of odd nowadays since the concept of sex is so malleable. So if we just changed if I identified as a woman and my wife identified as a man, we would still be in a heterosexual marriage. But if we both identified, just changed our views for the time being, then we would have to be considered a same-sex marriage. I hope you see how kind of crazy that is, right? Okay, in any event, the phrase equal marriage is self-serving. It's linguistic legerdemain, sleight of hand. All right, you see it right away. I did at least. All right, so he goes on, but if we study theology, it may surprise people what we discover. When he means theology, he means the Bible, okay? And here's what he says. Jesus doesn't refer to what we now define as homosexuality, a word not coined until the 19th century. And lesbianism is never mentioned in the Old Testament. When St. Paul writes on the subject, he condemns straight men using boys for sex, usually in pagan initiation rituals, and not people of the same gender having loving relationships. Okay, now I'm going to pause there, because in that one paragraph, he said a whole bunch of things, and they are all nonsense. Now, he's going to make a statement later on about, isn't it great when we finally discover what the text really says and means, and we read the background information, really get it in context, that it changes our views completely about what we thought. The story we bought from people who came before us who said it was this way when it really wasn't. So let me just take each of those by itself. Jesus doesn't refer to what we now define as homosexuality, okay? To which I respond, so what? That's actually a tactic. It's in the second book, the 10th anniversary edition, and it's the tactic called so. Or I probably should have called it so what, ? Because that's what you respond. Jesus doesn't refer to what we now define as homosexuality. Okay, well, we don't know what Jesus referred to in his whole life. All we have is a very, very limited record of what he did say. So it's somewhat an argument from silence about what he did say or didn't. But even in the record, if Jesus never said anything about homosexuality, so what? Now, this man presumes, well, that's significant about Jesus' view. So we're condemning homosexuals, but look at when you read the text, Jesus never did that. No, he never condemned wife beaters either. He never condemned gay bashers. He never condemned slave owners or racists or any of a host of other genuinely egregious harms. Does that mean he's in favor of them? No, that doesn't make sense. Of course, it doesn't make sense. So there's no point here. Jesus doesn't refer to what we now define as homosexuality. Okay? Second point, what we now define as homosexuality, that is, and he says, parenthetically, a word not coined until the 19th century, to which I respond, so what? So what? What does it matter if the word was coined in the 19th century? When was the word gravity invented? I don't know. Did Newton invent the word gravity? Maybe somebody before him? It wasn't figured out, understood, maybe until Newton's Principia, right? Who cares? That doesn't mean gravity was invented. Look, it wasn't like people were floating around until Newton said gravity, and all of a sudden everybody fell to earth. The word homosexual is an English word. All English words were invented at some point in time. And as far as I could tell, there was no English the first century. It was other languages, so English words, all English words were invented later. But words are invented to capture real things. So the English word table is about this thing. The word doesn't cause the thing to come into existence. It is the thing that exists prior to the word that justifies using the word to pick it out. And the same thing is true with homosexuality. Does he say that homosexuality didn't exist? Of course it did. Well, the word just came into existence. So what? What? Duh. I mean, please. Means nothing. Now, what he seems to be implying is that homosexuality was not a behavior that anybody thought was morally questionable before the, what does he put here, 19th century. But we know that's not true because it was morally questionable in the scriptures. On anyone's take, it was. Now, he's going to qualify that prohibition of homosexuality. You can't see this. I'm doing scare quotes because that's what he's doing. And he says, next move, and lesbianism is never mentioned. Now, here he qualifies it in the Old Testament. Now, you know, of course, that homosexuality is characterized in the Old Testament, in Leviticus, 2 different places. And he's going to be completely dismissive of that. So do you think that if lesbianism was mentioned in the Old Testament, that would matter to him? It wouldn't. So why is it significant that it's not mentioned? It ought not be then either. But he makes a big deal about it. However, he leaves out something important. It's not mentioned in the Old Testament, but it is mentioned in the New Testament as something abominable. And it's mentioned right there in Romans 1. All right? And Paul puts these two behaviors together. Men abandoning women and going after men, and women abandoning men and going after women. They're right there. Now, he's not like that. He's going to be dismissive of that statement. So it does show up in the New Testament. So why mention it doesn't show up in the Old Testament? It says, do you see how that's cheap? That's a cheap way of arguing. When I see these kinds of things, I realize these people have no case. If this is the best they can offer, all right, well, we continue. He says, as I mentioned, when St. Paul writes on the subject, that would be Romans 1, classically, although 1 Corinthians 6 is another passage, and there's a couple of others. What he does, according to the Reverend Michael Koren, is condemns, now listen to the words, I'm sorry for chuckling. He condemns straight men using boys for sex in pagan initiation rituals. Now you think about that. Can you get that line out of Romans 1? I can't get that line out of Romans 1. There's nothing like that in Romans 1. Nothing about pagan rituals is being characterized there. Nothing about using boys for sex, because Paul says men with men committing such deeds, all right? And how does he get this idea that it's straight men sexually abusing boys? Okay, you think about that. All of my straight listeners right now, every one of you, what would induce you to have sexual intercourse with a boy if you're straight? How is it even be possible? Do you see how incoherent this statement is? But it's meant to be dismissive. Oh, no, he's not talking about what we see now in our culture. In fact, he says that. He says, and not people of the same gender having loving relationships. Paul doesn't talk anything about relationships. He doesn't say some relationships that are loving, same sex, are okay, but those that are not loving are not okay. He never addresses the personal relationship element at all. He addresses the behavior. You know, and at this point, I think it's, I know this verse pretty well, but I'm just going to read it because it's unequivocal, all right? It is not ambiguous. It is not like, well, this could mean this, it could mean that, it could mean the other thing. No, it can't. It's really straightforward. Paul isn't talking about like pagan behavior in Rome in the letter to the Romans when he's talking about general revelation here in the second half of what's happening in the world and suppressing the truth and unrighteousness and God giving people over to sin. And the example he gives, now listen to the language, let me back up, verse 24, therefore God gave them over. So God is letting them, he's rubbing their nose in whatever it is, their rebellion. God he takes all the restraints off. He gave them over in the lusts of their hearts to impurity. So whatever he's about to describe is an example of letting people go wild in their impure behavior, right? So that their bodies would be dishonored among them. For, verse 25, as an example, they exchanged the truth of God for a lie, worship the creature rather than the creator. Okay? Verse 26, for this reason God gave them over. So we got two statements of giving them over. Two degrading passions. So not only is this impure, it's degrading. What is this he's talking about? For their women exchanged the natural function for that which is unnatural. Notice he doesn't talk about desires, he doesn't talk about relationships, he doesn't talk about loving or unloving or abusive or non-abusive. He talks about the functions of their sexual body parts. The word is krisis in the Greek. It means function. He's talking about plumbing. The women exchanged the natural function for that which is unnatural. What could he be talking about? Next phrase. And in the same way, another example he says of this thing is the men abandoned the natural function of the woman and burned in their desire toward one another. I can't imagine what he's talking about. I'm being sarcastic, obviously. Maybe I shouldn't be, but there's no ambiguity here. Men with men committing indecent acts and receiving in their own persons the due penalty of the error. And just as they did not see fit to acknowledge God any longer, in other words, these people who are doing these things, and there is both female and male homosexuality, behavior characterized here, are people that are rejecting God. And just as they did not see fit to acknowledge God any longer, God gave them over to a depraved mind to do things that are not proper. Okay. Now, there's more examples of what's not proper in that passage, but it definitely includes homosexual behavior and lesbian behavior explicitly. Now, how is it that Michael Korn missed that? How is it? How can he read that passage and miss it? and characterize it in the way he has, straight men using boys for sex in pagan initiation rituals as opposed to same gender loving relationships. No, this is a fantasy of this man. And then now he's going back to the Old Testament. Now, those few prohibitions that do exist in the Hebrew Scriptures are part of an ancient guide for an ancient people. Notice how dismissive he is. And after all, these laws restrict certain combinations of cloth and eating various foods, all considered irrelevant in modern Christianity. Okay, the restrictions that are included in this passage that he identifies some things that are clearly not applicable. There are reasons for this, by the way, but the same-sex behavior that is condemned as a capital crime in Leviticus is grouped up with bestiality and child sacrifice. So, Reverend Koren, are you suggesting that these are certain restrictions that are irrelevant in modern Christianity? So, child sacrifice is okay? No, I mean, there's a mixture of really bad things and some things that are inconsequential for now. But it seems like the same-sex behavior is one of those really bad things because that prohibition is repeated in the New Covenant text, even though the Old Covenant no longer applies. It's funny he closes this paragraph, dismissal of the Old Testament, by saying, if we're to take the Bible seriously, which I most certainly do, we can't always take it literally. God is too clever for that. And I wrote here in the margin, huh? 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 3 times. If we're to take the Bible seriously, which I most certainly do. Huh? You do? Then why did you say what you just said? You don't take it seriously. We can't always take it literally. Huh? If you're going to take it seriously, why aren't you taking it in a straightforward fashion the way the writers intended? Doesn't mean you think Jesus is a bush because he said, I'm the vine. Obviously, it's a figure of speech. But when he says, I'm the way, the truth, and the life, that's not a figure of speech. He's talking about something literal. He who believes in me has life. He who does not believe, the wrath of God abides in him. I mean, if we're going to take it seriously, why don't we just take him at his word? And the same is true of all these other things in the Old Testament and the New Testament pertaining to these things that are clearly forbidden that Reverend Michael Koren doesn't agree with. And so we're not going to take that literally, are we? If we take it seriously, we don't. If we are to take our Bible seriously, then we do not take it literally. That's what he's saying. That's why I say, huh? And then he says, God is too clever for that. I'm finally like, oh, huh, really, please. God's too clever to write clearly. He's going to put it in mysterious metaphoric language so that we never take anything literally. Then what? Oh, that's a clever God. Oh, please. Okay. And then he gives he cites the occasion. Look, all right. I mean, I've just thought of something else as I'm reading this, and it's just almost too much. Pardon me. I probably should be impassionate here or non-passionate or whatever the word is and just say, here's the way it is and here's what it says and no problem, no problem. But he goes to the Gospels, to the account of the centurion who has a slave who he loves. And then he looks at that circumstances. This is where he speaks to Jesus, or he actually sends an emissary that asks Jesus to just speak the word, my servant will be healed. All right? Well, this man characterizes that as a same-sex love relationship. Now, notice what's going on here. He cannot take the clear statements in the epistles by Paul about lesbianism and homosexuality at univocal face value. In other words, univocal means there's no confusion about what he's talking about. He can't take that. But then he can go and read in homosexuality into this account in Jesus, in the Gospels, where Jesus heals this man who is in a sexual relationship with a slave. And then says, isn't it interesting what happens when we understand the context and history of Scripture and read it without preconceptions and prejudice. That line is self-condemning in his case. Last point, and this goes to something I've been writing about. You'll get, if you receive our material, you'll get it November 1st. What is it, Tuesday? Monday? Monday. And the piece is titled, well, before I give you the title, I'll just read his line. But there's more to it, he says, as he's concluding his piece about how all of our Christian understanding about homosexuality is all a distortion and not an understanding of the genuine context and background and history and all that, which he doesn't deliver. But let's get back to Jesus. What would Jesus do? There's more to it, more to why Jesus would be with those celebrating pride and not those opposing and protesting. He stood, he's speaking of Jesus here, Jesus stood with the oppressed, the rejected, and the marginalized. Really? Now that statement is repeated by multitudes, even like evangelical pastors who don't hold Michael Koren's views on sexuality, thankfully, but still will say, well, Jesus did stand with the oppressed, the rejected, and the marginalized. Now, what you have to understand this point to be saying is, he stood with the oppressed, the rejected, and the marginalized as such. That is, he took his side with those people who were marginalized and defended them as marginalized people. He took his side with the oppressed people as such and defended them as oppressed people. He took the side of the rejected ones as such and defended the rejected people. That's the point. And in application, gays are oppressed, rejected, and marginalized, on his view at least, on many's view, although they really are the kind of the highest income slice in our country at least, but nevertheless, this is the way it's characterized. And so therefore, if Jesus stood with those oppressed, rejected, and marginalized, he's going to champion the cause of the gays and march in the gay parade. Here's the problem with the statement. It's not true. There's not a single verse in the Gospels that substantiates that claim. How do I know that? I read every single verse in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John looking for it. And I wrote a piece about that claim. And it's coming out November 1st on Monday. The title is The Legend of the Social Justice Jesus. Why do I title it that? Because it's a legend. It's not true. Jesus did not take the side of them as such, unless you want to say, well, he did take the side of the oppressed and the rejected and the marginalized, along with the non-oppressed, actually the oppressors. Jesus ate with tax gatherers. They were not oppressed. They were oppressors. They were extortionists, right? They were rejected, but they were rejected by the populace because they were the oppressor of the populace. And they certainly weren't marginalized. Jesus met with Nicodemus. Joseph of Arimathea, the rich man who owned the tomb that Jesus was buried in temporarily, he was a disciple. Well, how do these rich people who are part of the power structure get into Jesus' good graces? Because anyone that turned to him, Jesus accepted. So he stood with those who turned to him, who were marginalized and oppressed and rejected, and he accepted those who turned to him that were just the opposite. The issue wasn't whether you were oppressed or an oppressor, whether you're poor or rich, whether you're rejected or a rejecter, not to Jesus. The issue is whether you turn to him in whatever state of sin you happen to be in. That was it. I came not to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance. And by the way, in this piece, I identify every single verse in every gospel that has to do with the poor, and every single verse in which Jesus says, "This is why I came." Or someone else of note, like John the Baptist, or Zacharias in his prophecy, or Mary in the Magnificat, or Anna and the other guy there when Jesus was dedicated at the temple at his birth. What's his name? They all had something to say. They all spoke prophetically, and they gave information about why Jesus came. And everything dovetails, and nothing suggests that Jesus came to stand with the socially oppressed, the physically rejected, the socially marginalized, or the financially poor, for that matter. It's not there. Show me the verse. Yes, Jesus does say in two places about coming for the oppressed, but he doesn't say the nature of the oppression. But Peter does. Jesus trained Peter. And Peter says he came to release those who are oppressed of the devil. And, in fact, in Jesus' life, he released those who are oppressed by the devil. One of the most frequent things that he did was to release people from demon possession, those who were oppressed by the devil. Oh, I came to preach the gospel to the poor. What kind of poor? Financially poor? He didn't preach just to the financially poor. He preached to everybody. Matthew was the tax gatherer. He wasn't financially poor. He got the gospel. What kind of poor was he? He was poor in spirit. That's what he demonstrated eventually. And that's who Jesus is talking about. One of the justifications of identifying the poor, where Jesus makes reference to in maybe three places, as the poor in spirit, is in one of those places. That's precisely what he says, Sermon on the Mount, poor in spirit, at least in Matthew's version, poor in spirit. Come unto me, all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. That's later on in the Gospel of Matthew. Okay, all of you who are weary and heavy laden. People are weary and heavy laden of different things. And I think that he's talking about there the burden of the law that's on their shoulders. I'm speculating there, but this is actually very consistent. It's not a wild speculation. It's consistent with everything else that Jesus does. Because when Jesus has a chance to campaign for the oppressed per se, or the poor per se, he doesn't do that. John chapter 6, all the poor people come and they're listening to him and they get a free meal. 5,000 fed. Actually, I think it was just a little before John chapter 6, but in John 6, they come back. And Jesus said, don't labor for the bread that perishes, labor for the bread of life, and I am the bread of life. So he chastises them for coming for a free meal. Chastises these poor people who don't have bread for looking for bread from him. There's another parable he gave in which the landowner is the one who's abused by the servants. He's taken the side of the landowner, for goodness sake. So, this profile of the social justice Jesus does not emerge from the details of the text. And this is one reason I read every single line and quantified it for you in the piece coming out November 1st. And hopefully when you read our stuff, Solid Ground, mentoring letter. If you don't get that, go to the str.org, upper right-hand corner, register, get it. Snail mail, digital, we don't care. However you want it, we'll send it to you. You like it, you send it out to others. You want to save it, save it. Read it again. What we're trying to do is educate you, and so that you get the right views for the right reasons, but you also learn how you can get the right views for the right reasons. And that's what I do here, what the rest of the team does in its own way. Some things are taught, some things are caught. Do not be taken in with this kind of nonsense anymore, though, the Michael Koren nonsense. It's nonsense. It's foolishness, and it's dangerous foolishness because it distorts the Word of God on things that really, really matter. All right? All right, let's take a break. Calls coming up on Stand to Reason. All righty, Greg Koukl back at you here, giving you a piece of my mind as I do every week. On Tuesdays is when we record, and you can call in if you like. The number, 855-243-9975. Pretty easy, 855-243-9975. Now, what you may not know is it's not hard to get in and have your question aired, as I'm going to air questions in just a few moments. Some people think, well, I'll never get in. Well, look at we've usually have room on the lines, and we usually get to everybody. So be sure to call in and talk to Amy, and she'll put you in the queue, and I'll eventually get to you after I finish my comments, such as they are, and you know, it's a win-win. We're all happy. All right, let's go to South Carolina, and this is David. Welcome to the show, David.
Greg Koukl, man, what a pleasure to be talking to you. Let me just start by saying, listen, I was deployed last year with my reserve unit, and this was my fifth desert deployment.
No
and it
kidding.
Was in the yeah, it was my fifth one, and this one was in the dumps because of the politics of COVID. But let me tell you, groups like STR, Reasons to Believe, Gary Habermas, Frank Turek's group, I chewed through tactics and the story of reality like a 4-course meal.
Wow.
And so it was just food for me that got me through that time. I just want to say thank you. My girls, my teenage daughters, and myself and my wife, we are taking the 2-hour drive up north to North Augusta in the spring, and I'm getting you to sign my book.
Oh, that's great. So that's the reality event that we have this spring in that area. That's is that April? Is that March or April?
Yep, it's in March, I believe, and it's you're advertising it as Augusta, Georgia, North Augusta, South Carolina.
I've got on my notes here. I'm looking at it. April 22nd and 23rd. April 22 and 23.
Yep, that's it.
Okay, good.
We'll be there.
Then in March we're in Philly, you know, if all that works out. So, okay, super. I'll be looking forward to seeing you. Be sure to remind me of our conversation, okay?
I will definitely do that. I'll be right there on the front row, and I will remind you.
Great. And you're a trooper. I appreciate your service so much. Are you infantry? What did you do in your deployments?
No, I'm actually air crew. We fly C-130s all around the world.
Oh man, those big giant things.
Yeah, so it's just I'm so grateful to be able to do that. It's been so good for my family. This April will be year number 18, so I've got 2 more to go to seal the reserve deal.
Yeah, well, I was a reservist for 6 years, from 1968 to 74, Army.
That's right.
Just
so
saying,
we're in the Air National Guard.
Well, thank you. Well, good for you.
Pleasure.
Yeah, well, thank you. It's great to hear all of that. Thanks.
Absolutely. So I'll get to the question first and then give the context. The question is, for me, there are hills that I'm just willing to die on. And just from your last segment, they're getting larger in my field of view. However, the one I'm about to bring up, it's just not one that I see that I'm willing to die on. However, a dear brother in Christ, a regenerate believer such as myself, we have a very opposing view on this, and I'm just wondering, how can that be? Mm-hmm. And here's the context behind it. As you know, in the military, we are employees of the federal government, and the shot mandate has come out.
Vaccine.
The vaccine mandate. So I took the vaccine last January, just because I wanted to have it done and just didn't think twice about it. Well, my dear friend who serves with me in my reserve unit, he's actually a full-time member, he is having real trouble with this. And because of his convictions, he is requesting an exemption on religious ground. Okay. And I'm not sure if it's going to get passed, but that's the avenue which he is pursuing. There's only 2 avenues to get out of this: religious exemption or a medical exemption. The third possibility, you get out. Right. So where he and I will disagree, I said, hey, man, what core tenets of our faith is this shaking for you? And he said, he's mentioning verses in Revelation 13, Revelation 14, and 19.
That mark of the beast.
About the mark of the beast, the deception, those that receive the mark, And he's coupling that with there's been possible testing, according to him, with aborted fetuses. Now, I've had him listen to your previous podcast where you used the analogy, I believe, of hypothermic testing.
By the Nazis, right.
Right, by the Nazis. But because of those two reasons, the vaccine is a sin, and if he gets it, he is choosing to sin, and therefore he is not getting the vaccine. And so I don't feel this way. And I had my family get the shot. And listen, I will tell you this. I have real problems with this mandate just nationwide with government intrusion into private enterprise, private companies. I have a real problem. That's an overstepping of liberties just as a whole. However, we give up some of those liberties to serve. And I've been poked and prodded for almost 18 years, as has he. And so I'm just wondering why now? Why is this an issue now?
Yeah, okay. I do have a lot to say about this, and I'm not going to campaign for one side or the other, but I want to try to help answer your question by giving you maybe a more clear picture of what's going on here, okay? Let me just kind of go from back to front. So the last thing you said, we're in military, and we join up in the military, we give up some of those liberties, which is absolutely right. I'm 6 years for myself. I know what that looks like, and it's not fun, but you make a choice. And as it turned out, I mean, just to be entirely clear and upfront, when I joined the military, I was 17. In March of 68, I was still a senior in high school, but my goal was to get out of going to Vietnam. And so if you're a reservist, reservists were not activated like they are now. They weren't like almost regular Army, they in and out, or National Guard or whatever. You got in the reserves, and that was a good chance you weren't going to get activated unless you were a combat MOS. Then it was more likely, but not as likely as now, okay? And I was not a combat MOS specialty. I mean, it was my job in the military, for people who don't know what MOS means, okay? So I know about giving up some liberties, but you know what those liberties are that you're choosing to give up before you sign up. Okay. The issue, I mean, I think to be fair regarding the issue, and again, I'm not taking sides one way or another, but I am making this point, that the issue here is that there now is a new liberty that many view excessive in one's life that was not countenanced, not on the table, not part of the original bargain, but it's now being forced upon people, okay, and what seems to be a very reasonable piece of this discussion is there's no good reason for it. Okay, that is, the science doesn't require this kind of thing. It's one thing if you're joining the military, so everybody learns how to use an M1 or I don't know what they use now, but
9mm and M16.
Yeah, but everybody's a rifleman first, It's just like that line in Band of Brothers, If you're in my unit, you'd be a rifleman first, and then a radio guy second. So you always got to learn these basic stuff. All right, okay, we understand that, but then when a new thing is moved in here, and by the way, you can see the importance of that kind of thing and the discipline and knowing how to handle a weapon, and after all, you're a soldier, right? But when there are so much controversy about the vaccine, and so much of it seems to be clouded in deceptive, let me back up, in questionable science or questionable rationales, and the facts are very hard to determine, and this is so radically politicized. I think there is some propriety in somebody saying, I didn't sign up for this. And this is very, very different than the kinds of things that we're obliged to do in the military. And this environment is very, very different than what we're obliged. When I was in the Army, that was the height of the Vietnam War, and I was not even prohibited from marching against the Vietnam War, even though I was military.
Right.
Okay? So there wasn't an incursion in my liberties there. So that's quite a bit of latitude. But now, at least arguably, so I'm just saying, on the one hand, yeah, we give up liberties, but nobody agreed to give this liberty up. That is, that you can stick a needle in my body and inject me with something, which is what? And how safe is this? There are questions about that. And isn't that right for you to do that? And it looks to me like there's a lot of political reasons that are motivating you for doing that. So I think that this is in a separate category and needs to be dealt with that way. And it's not the same kind of thing as, well, we give up some rights when we go into the military, which I think everybody agrees to. All right. So that's
Right.
that's the kind of the dialing down, getting into focus on that particular issue. With regards to the mark of the beast, I don't think this is the mark of the beast. And so I don't have any reason to believe that. I know all about, I knew where the passage was in Revelations 13. It's hard to figure out what that is even referring to. If it is referring to some mechanical thing that controls you and your ability to buy and sell and all that other stuff, and a mark on the forehead or whatever, I don't have a reason to believe that this is it. However, the dynamic of what we see right now in terms of the trend towards totalitarianism, and that's my view, and a lot of other people see the same thing, and I've been writing about it all this year. This whole COVID circumstance fits in with that trend, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And I've written about that in one of my solid grounds. I said, regardless of what you think about COVID and the vaccines, it just shows how easily the government is able to control everybody, and they did it with the COVID stuff. Even to
Right.
the harm of the harm of civil liberties, the harm of the individual incomes and families, and also to the economy. They still can do it just like, bam, just like that. That ought to scare us a little bit if they have that capability to act in that way. So that's another thing, a concern about the encroachment of totalitarian behavior. Now, different people are going to assess that in different ways, right? Some people may not see it the way I do. Some may see it worse. But I don't think this is a chicken little sky is falling kind of circumstance. There are enough level-headed people across this political spectrum who are mortified by what they see the federal government and corporations, et cetera, doing. How the corporations now can say, take CRT, for example, or the vaccination. We can politicize you by force, hanging with your job hanging over your head, basically. And if you don't give into it, then we can fire you. Then you lose everything. All
Right.
So I think that's the way this stuff plays out for a lot of people. By the way, the aborted fetuses part, well, you know my view there. If in fact this vaccine does benefit from aborted fetuses but does not create a market for abortion, then in my view, there's no theological or moral liability there. But other people have a different point of view, and I acknowledge that. So if these vaccines are developed from aborted fetuses, then someone may have a bona fide personal moral complaint about that. And I acknowledge the legitimacy of their conscience in that issue. Therefore, they would have a legitimate concern, religious concern for an exemption, okay? Now, I don't think, with regards to this stuff, you should have to give a religious rationale, have religious grounds for an exemption, because I don't think that the only violation imaginable here is a religious violation. I think there is arguably a human rights violation when you are told sticking. You don't even have to take chemotherapy if you don't want, and you just want to die. You can get a doctor kill you. You're not supposed to be. You got all of these things with medical records where nobody can know anything. Even your kids can get things done at school that your parents don't get to know because of privacy. But in this area, you're trotted right out in the open.
Wow.
Your private medical. So these are all, I think, bona fide, legitimate concerns, and somebody that can say, "Well, look, I'm not going to cooperate with that, and I ought not have to." And so this is a hill I'm going to die on. So I got the vax, just so you know, everybody knows. I had to weigh all the things, et cetera, and so I got the Pfizer. I got the first 2 shots. I don't know if I'm going to get a third. But the point, I did that for a number of different reasons, but I am completely sympathetic to those who are genuinely concerned about what seems to be real concerns about the health of the maybe dangers related to the vaccine. And it's very hard to know when you have people that are high up in the administrative pecking order saying, no worries, no worries, no worries, everything's fine, and you have good reason to think that these guys have not been telling the truth, well, then you have reason not to trust them. I just got caught by surprise with the music here, David, which means we're done.
That's okay.
Hey,
I
hope it's helpful.
Talking with you.
Yeah, I look forward to seeing you in Augusta, okay, brother?
Very helpful, and I will see you in April, Greg. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye now.
All right, bye-bye.
And that's it for this hour. Boy, caught me by surprise. I have more to say about this, but I'll have to wait for the next show. Greg Koukl for Stand to Reason. Give him heaven, friends. Bye-bye.